Every human should have consistent, abundant amounts of energy. And the truth is, the majority of humans don't. And if I'm taking action that's in alignment with my ethics, my morals, my values, and my principles, I know that I'm building inner self-esteem. And as my inner self-esteem gets higher, it makes it easier for me to do right by myself, which means I'm benefiting every single life that I touch. If you need caffeine to feel like you're alive, what you're avoiding is the feeling like you're dead. And if you avoid the feeling of death, you'll never make the choice to have life.
Hello and welcome to Behind the Mic Wellness, where my mission is to provide you with a wealth of knowledge, inspiration, and connection to support healthy living to millions. By introducing you and millions of others to some of the most captivating and experienced voices in longevity, biohacking, health and wellness, and more. We'll take you on a deep dive into the lives and stories of these podcasters and luminaries. I'm your host, Scott Emmens, and together we'll unravel these personal journeys and beliefs of these incredible individuals, helping you get to know the podcasters you already love on a whole new level, and find the voices you'll meet here on Behind the Mic Wellness. Hello, everyone. This is Scott Emmens at Behind the Mic Wellness, and I am thrilled today to have Christopher Lee Maher on our podcast today. Christopher is a former Navy SEAL, also has just started a podcast called True Body Intelligence, which I highly recommend you check out. Christopher also is a best-selling author. I believe the book is Free for Life. Is that correct, Chris?
Yep.
And his website is True Body Intelligence. He is the founder of True Body Intelligence and the True Body Intelligence podcast. And I'm thrilled to have him here today. He's also had studied at the University, I believe, of in California, of traditional Chinese medicine, I believe.
Yeah, so I studied at the Pacific College of Science, which I learned traditional Chinese medicine, but also Western pathology.
Excellent. So, Christopher, welcome to Behind the Mic Wellness. I'm so thrilled to have you here. Your message is tremendous. And tell me, you were just mentioning, you never know who can afford, what in these days and times. And you're really, one of the reasons that you started this journey with the podcast was to help people get the information that you're trying to provide. So just give us that brief overview, and then we'll take a step back into kind of your pivotal moments in your life that led you to this place you're at today.
Yeah, I mean, I feel part of the reason why I was created and had an opportunity to come to Earth was to serve powerfully. And one of those ways is by giving information to people. And so I have a very unique data set because I've been doing 100,000 hours of practical research into the negative effects of unrelenting lifetime accumulated stress that every single human suffers from. And also creating strategies and tools to deal with daily accumulated stress. And so I feel like I'm at a point in my life where I've had the success that I wanted, and professionally, and I'm healthy, I'm grounded, I become the embodiment of my work. And so it feels like the prudent action to take is to realize the economics of where we live in the world, and what's available to some people is unavailable to a lot of people. And that always seemed unfair and inequitable to me. And so I paid a crew to come out to my place for 5 days, and I recorded 22 episodes of valuable information that I think every human should know when it comes to the effects, but also a deep education on stress and how to get out of stress and the actions that you have to take in order to become well at a psychological, sort of mental level, at an emotional level, at a physiological level, at a structural level, at an energetic level. When I say energetic level, that's confusing for people. What I mean by that is that every human should have consistent, abundant amounts of energy. And the truth is, the majority of humans don't. And I've traveled all over the world. I've been in every country except Russia. Okay. And I go through airports all the time. I tell people this a lot. I'm at an airport. People are walking past me.
I'm smiling because I listened to this today and it resonated with
Yeah.
me.
And I see where people are swollen, right? I see where people have terrible posture. I see where, man, their hair's falling out, right? I see people, and but their gait and their walk is telling you that something's off. The back is stiff. The second they move their leg, their hip moves with it. I mean, and I've been doing this for 100,000 hours, so I can see it. And I feel like it's important for me to at least let them know the information. And then they can choose to take action if they want. But I feel it would be massively irresponsible if I left the planet and left with my research and my data and my information, because I know that it could help make the world a better place. And I know that that begins with one individual at a time. And so I feel like service is important and it's one of my highest values. And that's why I created the podcast.
Outstanding. Well, the reason that I created this podcast is a similar reason. I want voices like yours to have a place where new audiences can find them, right? So we're going to talk a lot about you and your journey today, and how you got to where you're at. I just wanted to share a couple of anecdotes before we get there. So two of the things that really resonated with me, that one you just mentioned, is, are you willing to take heartfelt action? I want to talk about that as we get further into the interview, what you mean by that. One of the things that really resonated with me, I think it was episode 4, was you had talked about the drain that has a drip,
Yeah.
and you're in a place where you're just sort of neutral. You're not like fighting against life in a sense. That drip can either be soothing or it can drive you crazy. If you're in a stressed out place where everything's all, you've got this stress weighing on you, that drip is probably going to drive you nuts. Or if your spouse or significant other's like, you got to fix that drain. But to you, you're like, it's just a drip, and maybe I find that noise soothing. But if you're in a stressed out place, you're probably going to find that drives you kind of crazy and adds more stress to your life.
Yeah.
And what that resonated so well with me, because literally 2 days ago, my wife was like, the shower's dripping. I'm like, I don't care. Do you really want, like, really, it's not that big of a deal, you know? So, I thought, well, wow, it must be a decent place to just like let that drip not bug me, because a year ago that might have drove me nuts.
Yeah.
So Chris, with those kind of anecdotes, for the audience to nibble on, let's take a step kind of back into your pivotal moments in life. So at 22, you become a Navy SEAL. I don't know if you want to start before that with your story, and you're welcome to. But
Yeah.
what are some of the pivotal moments that led you to become a Navy SEAL, and then some of the pivotal moments in your life journey that kind of got you to the place you are today?
Okay. Well, I think one of the important things is that I went to boarding school in Hershey, Pennsylvania, which we have a friend, you have a colleague, named Gordy Drain. And I've always had mad respect for Gordy, and he linked us together. And at boarding school, I studied business. And so I was always entrepreneurial minded. And so I made the mistake of going to college. And a lot of people say, oh, you made a mistake going to college. And I went to Shippensburg University. And there I wasn't really into school, you know. And I was doing what other kids do who are sort of aimless in a certain way. And I was filling my time up with, shooting pool, playing basketball, playing football, weight training, going to parties at night, socializing, a completely different experience that I had in boarding school, where I had structure. And so initially I didn't know what to do without structure. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think part of the reason why SEAL training was attractive to me is because I knew they had structure. And I had gone through a program at Milton Hershey School for 10 years where discipline was imposed, but I never wanted to be there. So I never volunteered for that. My grandmother put me in the school. So it was sort of imposed discipline that was non-voluntary, right? So I didn't get the benefit of understanding how to implement the strategies that they had even taught me, because it was so forced.
Right.
And I'm the type of person that I have a well-defined ego. So if you try to push me into something and I'm not in agreement with it, I'm just going to push back against the system. And I went over to a friend's house that was also really good friends with Gordy, Mark, and he had this biannual magazine about SEAL training in the basement. And I
Wow.
picked it up and I saw the cover, and there were like 6 or 8 boat crews with a log over their shoulder, running down the beach, white t-shirts on, green khakis, and you could see their names stenciled across their chest. And you could see the grimacing on their face. And I thought, these people will challenge me.
Wow.
Like, I was aware that I needed that challenge. I was 20 at the time. And within a week of reading through that magazine, I was at the recruiter's office and I was in the military 3 months later.
Would you call that a synchronicity or divine intervention?
I think there was something about it that was absolutely divine. But I'm someone that believes synchronicity is ever present, and it's whether or not you're awake to the messages that are being delivered by the universe to you. And I wasn't aware of that. In fact, my buddy's mom picked me up on my birthday, and I was living, in an apartment with one of my other friends. Just he said, "Listen, you're coming to live with me." And I was like, "What's happening? This is weird. Like somebody just knocked on my door and told me I'm coming to live with them." And I was like, "I don't know what's going on. Let me grab my clothes." And I just grabbed my bags. And I drove back to her house. And her kids was one of the guys I went to boarding school with at Milton Hershey School. And I moved in with her and her husband and her newborn daughter. And that was what I needed, right? I needed someone to care for me. I needed someone to say, "Hey, listen, you're really valuable. And I've heard all these really amazing things with you. And I want you to come live with me and my family." And to this day, in fact, after we get off this call, I will be driving down to go see her to surprise her at her house.
That's fantastic.
Right. And so that I think is divine intervention in the sense that my entire trajectory of my life changed because that woman was willing to knock on my door.
And this was when you were how old?
This was when I was 19.
Wow. So that's like a divine intervention, literal life.
Yeah. Literally life changing. I gained a sister, I gained a brother, I gained a mom, and she treated me like her own kids, and she was direct with me. And I really appreciated that. And I believe that she's the one that really helped me manifest the life that I have.
That's amazing. So, that's a pivotal moment in your entire life, right?
Yeah.
Like a defining moment.
Yeah.
And then the next defining moment, obviously, is deciding to go to the recruiter's office. And how does that process go? I mean, how do you qualify? I'm sure the audience interested to know, like that.
Yeah. Yeah. When you
on
go
that
to the
list.
recruiter's office, they really what they want to do is they have a certain quota that they have to meet every month to get potential soldiers into the programs. And you have to take a test. It's like English and math and science. And it's called an ASVAB. And you have to score a certain amount in order to be able to get into specific programs. And so I've always been lucky because I had high intellect. So I didn't do any studying. I just sat down and just took the test. And they were like, "Okay, well, you qualify for these things." And I thought, well, this is awesome. And the recruiter kind of stiffed me in a way. But as I look back, it was probably the best thing that happened because he could have given me at the time what was called a dive fair program. And that meant that if I didn't graduate from SEAL training, I didn't have to stay in the Navy. I could have gone back to civilian life. And he didn't give me that contract. And they sent me up to New London, Connecticut. And I was on the USS Fulton, a subtender with wooden decks. At the time, I think it was like the second oldest ship in the Navy, right?
I would
So
say with wooden decks, it had to be up.
yeah. So they wanted me to be a boatswain's mate, which means I'm working outside all winter long in Connecticut on the river. Um, I mean,
Connecticut winters can be brutal.
yeah,
I
they're
live there,
brutal,
so I
right?
know.
So the rain and you don't have proper equipment to stay warm. And I think that experience kind of toughened me up a bit and got me to sort of do things that I don't like. And I knew that SEAL training was coming. And that I think I was there for about 16 months. And I got what I needed from that experience because I met a really lovely woman named Diana Ruiz, and she was a sweetheart, and we built a very powerful relationship. And so I got to sort of fill up some holes in my life that I didn't get to experience when I was in boarding school at an emotional level. And then at some point, it was time for me to go to SEAL training. So I passed all the exams that I needed to do, and then I was off to SEAL training. And that was another sort of awakening.
And do you think if you hadn't had that experience on the boat, that you would have still passed SEAL training, or do you think that that was kind of needed to get you to that place?
I think that those 16 months made me continue to crave SEAL training. And just like, oh my God, I got another year. Okay, I'm just going to suck it up, right? I'm going to keep doing things that I don't like. I'm going to keep doing things that I don't like. I'm going to keep doing things now that I hate. But I know at the end of the rainbow, I'm going to get an opportunity to go to BUDS. And BUDS is basic underwater demolition / SEAL training. And I think the experience of that longing for something, was a better idea for me. I think if I would have went to boot camp, went to a basic A school and got plopped into SEAL training 3 months later and had an opportunity to quit and be out of the military. But because I was on the USS Fulton, there was no way I was ever going to go back to the regular Navy.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
So,
And there was no option of you can just quit and not be in the
no,
military. Right. So
because I didn't sign that
you
contract. Now,
you
bunches of
burn the
my
ships.
buddies,
Yeah, you
yeah,
burn
I
the
would
ships.
be going back to the fleet, back to a miserable job. And I thought, no, I'm going to tough this out.
Awesome. And was it more difficult or less or about what you expected in terms of the intensity and the dropout rate and the psychological, emotional, physical challenges that you faced?
Yeah. I had experience working out before intensely because I was a good high school athlete. Yet you're doing a lot of the exercises in sand, and sand gets down your pants. And the sand is always wearing away at the surface of your skin. And you get these things called raspberries all over your bottom. And, that kind of, how do I say it? It forces you to work through not only physical pain, but annoyance,
Right.
right?
Like a pebble in the shoe starts.
Yeah, like a pebble in your shoe, sand in your ears, sand on your scalp. You're running around, boats are bouncing off your head, the sand's getting embedded in there's just all these little things. And I'm someone who was on the spectrum, right? And so when you're on the spectrum, I'm highly sensitive, right? My smell is highly sensitive, my vision is highly sensitive, but my tactile sense of my skin is off the chart sensitive. And so SEAL training really sort of desensitized me. I don't know if you saw the movie with Ben Affleck, the accountant,
I did.
right? And I could really relate when he turned the music up super, super loud and was smacking his bones with that sort of broom handle. And yeah, SEAL training did that for me. It really desensitized me. But the problem was it desensitized me so much that when I got out of SEAL training, I needed to drink and I needed to do things that were extremely extreme in order to feel.
Right.
Right. And so, yeah, so that was quite a bit of its own journey.
So with whatever you're comfortable with sharing, like, so we're now out of the SEALs, kind of going through this post SEAL we'll call it a trauma, continual stress, right? And to kind of feel life and enjoy life, you're doing extreme things, whether it's drinking or working out or whatever those things are.
Yeah.
At what point, so maybe walk us a little through that journey, and then when did the switch flip for you? What caused that flip?
The switch flip. Now, I would call this another divine intervention, right? I was driving back from UCSD. There was a track meet up there. And at the time, I was in college. I was running track and field. I had aspirations of qualifying for the Olympic trials. It was never going to happen with the body that I had because now I had a grunt body, right? A body that could continue to go and go and go no matter how much you suffered. I no longer had like a high, sleek, performing body.
I know, yeah, as a former bodybuilder, weightlifter, I get the difference.
Yeah, you understand, right? So I thought I could take SEAL training and that mentality and put that into track and field in terms of the type of effort that I was giving. And that caused me to have a lot of pain at the structural level. So knee pain, ankle pain, hip pain, back pain. And it started creeping in slowly. But because it was slowly, I just kept sort of like dealing with it and applying a SEAL team mindset, which is if you don't mind the pain, it will never matter. Just keep moving ahead because your goal is more important than the discomfort that you're feeling. So I was all too willing to feel discomfort and other people weren't, but I didn't know that that was going to create problems. And so I was overusing everything. I wasn't getting enough sleep. I was still living as if I was in a SEAL team. So I would go out and party and have a good time. And then I was training like an Olympic athlete. Okay. And then I was doing other training behind all of my coaches' back. So I was overtraining constantly because I wanted to perform really well. And those limiting beliefs that I had bought into were only applicable to special force units. They were never going to be applicable for high performing athletes. Okay. And when I say high performing, I mean the fastest of the fast, the quickest of the quick, the highest of the high, not someone who, runs a race for 500 miles. Right.
Right.
SEAL training is great for, ultra distance runners. Right. But for what we call high performing athletes, not so much. So I had a lot of pain in my body. And I was coming back from a race at UCSD, went down to meet another buddy I went to Milton Hershey School with, Andre Coveney, okay, and went to a bar named Ole Madrid, which years later I was the bouncer and the bar back and the bartender there, right?
Full circle.
Like the funny circle. And he made a rum and coke for me. This was one of his best friends, so he, spiced it up. I drank the rum and coke and I got in my car, went home, and I was used to driving fast. So I got pulled over going 80 miles an hour. I popped .08 and I was 300 yards from my house and the cops could have easily followed me home. 2 ex-Marines. We have a military connection. And they go, nope, we need to take you to a drunk tank. And they served me down into the drunk tank. And I was on my bench by myself, and there were 5 elder Mexican males sitting across from me, all slumped on top of each other. 2 had urinated themselves. And they were somewhere between like 55 and 65. And I remember looking at them, and I was getting ready to come out with some disapproval, right? And I was really getting ready to get down. And then I heard a little voice. The little voice said, listen, if you don't get your act together, this will be you when you're their age. And I think the stark contrast of the cold in the cell, plus the cops running their billy club down the fenced-in area, sort of woke me up out of my drunken stupor. And I was like, yeah, I got to get my act together. And so they did another breathalyzer, called a buddy, picked me up, and I went home. And I walked into my townhouse that I lived in at the time, and there was a basement, not a basement, a bathroom as the door opens off to the right. And I went in there and I looked myself dead in the eyes and I had a conversation with myself for 2 hours. And basically, Spirit said to me, you need to figure out and understand how you got to this point in your life before you go to bed. And it was like, I don't know, 8 in the morning. I hadn't slept a wink. And I think because I was so tired, I didn't have the resistance to fight myself. And so I said, okay. I basically got down to understand I need to call a family member. So I called my Aunt Betty and I told her what happened. And she said, well, of course you got a DUI because you come from a family of alcoholics. And I was like, alcoholics? I wouldn't be considering myself an alcoholic. And then, I got off the phone and I called everyone that I knew at the time that I was partying with and hanging out with. And I said, look, if you're calling me up to drink or get high or do any other extracurricular activities that aren't to my benefit, you need to lose my number. And I called up everyone. And guess what? No one ever called me back.
I was just going to ask. So you probably lost a good chunk, 90% or more of those.
Yeah. Yeah. And then I just got more focused.
Make a life change like that.
Yeah, I think what's very unique about me is this. And if there's a better way to do something, I'm okay leaving the thing that I was doing behind.
Yeah.
Because I may be rebellious, but I'm also intelligent, right? And it's difficult for me to ignore data. Like these things that I was doing got me to be in a drunk tank. Do I want to be in a drunk tank again? No. So I'm going to separate myself from the things that I was doing. This is just basic logic for me. And then I did that. And I also decided that I was going to be celibate. And I dropped into celibacy and in sobriety because I wanted to step away from all the things that were distractions from what I really wanted. And then I started training harder. And that helped me in the sense that it caused me to push the envelope further and caused me to ruin my body faster.
Right. So
and go ahead.
So now you're kind of recovering because you've taken these distractions and bad behaviors and toxins out of your body, replaced it with even more training. You were already overtraining. And I think we know now, it's very obvious that recovery is 80% of the game, right? If you're not recovering, you can work out all you want, but if your body doesn't recover, you're just continually damaging yourself. Now, the analogy I find is, if you want to make calluses on your hand, you don't go out on concrete and rub them till they bleed every day. You rub them a little bit on the tool, and when they start to feel raw, you take a brick and you let the callus build up. You're always ripping it to a blister. You're never going to get a callus. You're just always going to have a blister.
Yeah. Yeah. So basically, I was spending the energy in 1997. I was spending the energy from 1998. Right. And by the time I was in 1998, I was already spending the energy from 2000. Right. And I was creating this huge deficit. And then I started to get sense organ issues, which means I was losing my hearing dramatically. I was losing my vision by 31, and I needed a full-blown hip replacement by 33. And, I can ignore certain levels of discomfort in my joints, but when you get a throbbing, like ice pick feeling in the center of your hip that never goes away no matter what you do, at some point you're going to bend the knee and ask for help. And it took me a while. And then I finally reached out and asked for help. And then I focused all my time, all my energy, all my resources on figuring out how to holistically put myself together. But when this happened, like late 1998, late 1999, 2000, there weren't any real systems out there that could provide honest, simple solutions that were not only practical, but could create instantaneous change. That didn't exist on the planet. And so I kept praying. I go to bed and I pray, like, look, send me to somebody who knows something different. And of course, another one of my friends, these are all separate instances that I went to boarding school with, sent me a video of a guy that was on Good Morning America that had 5 stretches that would change my life. And immediately, I pushed back at him, thinking, like, who are you to tell me I need to change my life? Basically, fuck off. And 2 weeks later, one of my clients, this very sort of delicate, sensitive, half Irish, half Japanese woman in her mid-30s, called me up and said, Christopher, I just saw this guy on Good Morning America. And I said, let me guess. He's got 5 stretches that'll change my life. And she said, did you see it? And I said, no, but I'm starting to get the point.
Another synergy and divine intervention.
Yeah, the divine intervention. And I think I was someone who always waited for things to happen in threes. And that didn't happen that time. I was smart enough to take the advice and start doing the research. And it took me about 6 months to track the guy down. And I got him on the phone for a couple of hours, and he eventually agreed to see me 4 months later. And he helped me create instantaneous permanent change in my body. I worked with him 4 to 6 hours a day, actually really 6 to 8 hours a day for 4 days in a row. And after that, there was no pain in my body ever again. And I went home.
Including your hip?
Including everything. There was no more pain. It was gone.
The deep sort of biohacking question here, just out of curiosity. Are we getting into the fascia here? Are we stretching up with rotting?
No. Yeah, no. Initially, I got into fascial work with what is it called? With Heller work. And she was a student of Ida Rolf. And then I got into Rolfing, and then I got into Feldenkrais, and then I got into the Gosku method, and then I got into acupuncture, acupressure, yoga, hot yoga, like anything and everything that was available then.
And this was before the 5 stretching.
Yeah. This is before the guy. So, and I thought I had it together when I received that email from my buddy, Mark Perspalasia. I thought, I got it together. Beat it, jerk.
Right.
Who are you to be telling me to change my life?
5 stretches aren't going to do crap. Right?
Yeah. Change your life. Why don't you go find him and stretch your brains out, right? So what I realized at the time, that he was helping remove these massive amounts of stress and tension out of my structural body through using eccentric contractions. I started to get a little bit angry. And the reason why I was angry is I spent all that money, I spent all that time, I spent all that effort, and all those other clowns, this is how I was thinking at the time, took me an inch and I needed to go a mile. And this guy took me a mile and a half in a fraction of the time. So there was a bit of me that was bothered. And so I used that
part, or was it the frustration that the other people didn't know what they were doing? Or
I think it was that no one on the planet really knew what they were doing. And even he, when I look back, he knew something. He knew some decent things, but by the time I was done working with him, I had essentially changed his whole system. He was no longer using the things that he was doing on me because they weren't effective enough. And so when you have stress and tension and pain in your body, you need big forces. And what I mean by that is you need strong forces. And so the strongest force, the strongest contraction that you have in your body is an eccentric contraction. Okay. Why is it so strong? Because it can generate 30 to 50% more force than a concentric contraction. And the muscle is lengthening underneath that maximal load of force, which is automatically lengthening the muscle, um, creating more space in the fascia. But the key thing that it's doing, it's automatically rotating the bones back into the correct position simultaneously. And this is what no one in modern society understands.
Awesome. That's great. That's a great story. I'm glad you took it on the second cue. So all right, so now we've gotten some serious health back. And just out of curiosity, what event were you training for in the Olympics? Was it 400 meter?
My goal was 800 meters.
800 meter? Yeah, that's a grueling race, man.
Of course. I mean, you would think that, of course, of all the stuff that I would pick something grueling.
Right. I think the 800 is kind of considered one of the toughest races in the Olympics, right? Because
yeah, for sure.
400 is still kind of in the sprint zone. 800 is like you still got to be sprinting, but you got to sprint for 800 meters. It's
yeah. I mean, the 400 is difficult once you hit the 300 meter mark.
Right.
Up until then, the 400 is like a breeze. And then you got 100 yards of pure pain.
Right.
When you run the 800, the first 500 meters is a joke. Well, when you get to that last 250, oof.
Yeah.
It's like cement is in your legs.
My daughter runs track for Ryder. She does the 100 hurdles, and she sometimes does the 400, and sometimes the 400 hurdles. And when the coach is like, "Hey, we need you for the 400 hurdles," she's just like, "Oh my god!" Because the first 300 meters not so bad, but that last 100 meters over hurdles, girls are going down left and right. And this is NCAA Division I, so it's not like high school here, but that's a tough race too. But the 800 it's just absolute agony for, like you said, 250 meters.
Yeah.
So now we're in this place where you've healed yourself, and is this the point where you start deciding, like, okay, I'm going to learn everything there is to learn, or what?
This is the point where I decide that my plan is to take SEAL training and turn it into HEAL training. And I'm going to learn everything that I can to remove tension from the human body. And I start working on myself 5 or 6 hours a day. And I recruit from my sphere of influence friends of mine to join me on the journey. And we start creating this crew of all guys that have aspirations to get to the Olympics and perform. And so we're meeting 2, sometimes 3 days a week, and we're working on each other for 3 and 4 hours at a time.
So when you say working on each other, like doing the stretches and
we created a system. We're continuously creating new positions, and then doing things in a way that was more balanced. We were using maximal isometric, maximal concentric, and maximal eccentric contractions. Where when I first started out, it was basically like maximal isometric contractions with a little bit of eccentric force, but we were never really doing any concentric force. And so I immediately thought, in order to keep the body in balance, you need to be doing all three.
Right.
Because some of the athletes, some of the people who were coming to me for help from me, they had too much isometric tension. Some had too much eccentric tension. Some had too much concentric tension. And so you need to be using all forms of contraction to pull them into balance physically, mentally, emotionally, and energetically. And so that's what I got busy doing. And we created hundreds of new positions and a whole new science around what I had originally learned.
And just briefly for the audience, explain the difference between concentric, eccentric, and isometric.
Yeah. So when you look at a concentric contraction, imagine doing a push-up. Everyone knows what a push-up is. Everyone's at least seen a push-up. Okay. And you're going to allow yourself to lower. You're going to start at the top and you're going to allow yourself to lower for 8 to 10 seconds. But on your back is going to be 50-pound sandbags. And those 50-pound sandbags are going to create a massive amount of force And you're going to have to lower yourself as slow as you can. Well, while that's happening, the muscle's contracting maximally, lengthening simultaneously, which is changing the rotations of the bones. But now you got to come up
Right. And
because your chest is on the floor now.
That's an eccentric force.
That's
right?
an eccentric.
Going down.
Okay. Coming up off the floor is a concentric contraction. So now you take all the sandbags off and you lift yourself up. Okay. When you get to the top and you stop and there's no movement, you're just hanging out there in like a modified plank with your arms completely locked out. That's what's called a dynamic contraction, an isometric contraction, because there's no movement. And the value of isometric contractions is this: it allows you to recruit tissue that's disconnected from the nervous electrical system. And so let's say your chest has, and your triceps, let's say there was only 100 fibers. Most humans that I've worked with, and I've worked with the best athletes in the world, so they have very little access to all of the tissue that could be involved in those concentric and eccentric contractions. And so if I go back into the beginning portion of a push-up when I'm locked at the top with my arms locked out and I put 100 pounds, 250-pound sandbags on my back, what's going to happen? In order for me to maintain that position, I've already run out of oxygen. My body needs to recruit more tissue. And so now it starts turning on more fibers. And the longer I stay in that position, I need to recruit more tissue. So the way that I do my work is we use eccentric contractions to stretch. We use concentric contraction to strengthen, and we use isometric contractions to recruit. And so basically it's strengthen, recruit, stretch. So I strengthen the new tissue. I recruit more tissue. I stretch the new tissue I just recruited, and now I strengthen that new tissue, and then I gather more tissue. And if you keep doing that again and again and again and again, before you know it, the entire muscle belly and the full length of the muscles absolutely turned on.
Yeah, and that's when you get that performance body, because you recruited all the fibers, you've stretched those fibers, and you've filled them with as much nerve connection and as much tissue recruitment as possible.
For sure.
That's where you're going to have a body that's not just looks good, but performs well.
Yeah. Yeah, it's sort of where function meets form, meets grace.
Yeah.
Right. Because now you have a body that's basically steel wrapped in silk.
I love that.
Right. And it's as strong as it is long. Like, that's a high performing body. And, one of the coaches was here with me at Penn State yesterday. And he goes, man, I'm always impressed by how you have to beat every single person's force. And we're talking from 7 a.m. in the morning. I barely drink anything. I don't have lunch. And I have these, 18 to, 34-year-old world champion, Olympic wrestlers, 4-time national champions that I have to push on and beat all of their eccentric force with my concentric strength. And I don't go to the gym, right? I don't run a lap. Right? My only exercise is like walking through the airport and doing this system that I've been developing called Bestercise, which is the best form of exercise because it uses isometric, eccentric, and concentric contractions through maximum ranges of motion with maximal force. And so I come in here, I'm almost 60. And
Damn, you look good, bro.
Oh, thank you.
I would have guessed you were like 51 at the most.
Yeah. And so I am pounding on these guys, and I always have to beat their force. And this goes on hour after hour after hour, day after day. And I wake up the next day and I'm ready to go. And it's because of this kind of training. So basically, my body's bulletproof. My energy is bulletproof. My spirit is bulletproof. My emotions are bulletproof. My emotions are grounded. My energy is always abundant. My body's flexible, and powerful, and strong. And my mind is always clear.
I
And
mean,
my
I think
connection to God
that
is
so many,
supreme.
I think so many people aspire to that. So I went to Springfield College, and the motto there was spirit, mind, and body.
Yeah.
And I have taken that to heart. I call it the triangle of life, basically. And it's just like fire. You need, you need three things to start a fire. You got to have fuel, you got to have a heat source, and you got to have oxygen. You're
Yep.
missing any one of those three things, you will not be able to start a fire. And I think the same thing goes true for an optimal
Well,
mind,
there's one other thing
body.
you left out. You
What's
need
that?
intelligence.
Yeah, that good point. True body intelligence. Yeah, you do. And the same thing applies for spirit, mind, body, and maybe I'll throw in intelligence in the center of that triangle, right?
Yeah.
Um, and then with that, you've got to have the heartfelt action you talked about. So,
Yeah.
but to me, I think you're right. You've got to have this connection with God or spirit, some higher power, right? You've got to have your body has to be in condition, your mind and your intelligence have to all be working for you to be overall your best. So let's talk a little bit about your philosophy and kind of how you went from, you started with these five guys, and you built these stretches, and then you've even, you kept on pushing and pushing. And so at some point you write a book and you start to say, I'm gonna change my aspirations from going to the Olympics to I'm gonna teach other people this. Tell us about that transition. When did that occur in this
When
process?
did that occur? That occurred. I went to sit, one of my friend's moms said, look, I bought you a session for this woman for you to go talk to. Okay. And you've seen movies and they have like a psychic or blah, 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 blah. And, I think they call it clairvoyance. And I went to see this woman and I sat down and she just started telling me things that only I would know. And then at some point, this session, I think it was for 90 minutes. And about 5 minutes in, I just stopped her and I said, look, I get it. You know who I am. You've nailed all these things. I just need you to tell me what I need to know in terms of taking action to my own benefit. And you don't need to tell me any more than that. And I get it. And she said, look, you're destined to be in music in the future. And you're destined to understand medicine. And that's what you got to put your focus on. And I said, cool, I'm out. And then I signed up for the Pacific College of Science, and I was in school, shortly after that. And
Wow.
I decided to focus on putting my energy, time, and effort into other people.
I mean, that's quite a story because it's, it seems like at every kind of pivotal moment when you were needing something to,
Yep.
to change, some intervention that and let's be clear. A lot of people get those moments, but they don't act on them or they
No,
don't see them, right?
no.
And I think that's the key part is you need to see those opportunities and then take advantage of that and say, you know what? I'm getting the message here. I'm going to take action. And you talk about heartfelt action a lot. So in your podcast, what do you mean when you say heartfelt action versus take action?
Yeah. A lot of people are taking action to the benefit of other people, right? And that's a very specific version of love. That's a masculine version of love, right? But the feminine version of love is me taking action to my own benefit, right? But action that's heartfelt, right? And what that means is the action that I'm taking is in alignment with my values, it's in alignment with my ethics, and it's in alignment with my principles. And if I'm taking action that's in alignment with my ethics, my morals, my values, and my principles, I know that I'm building inner self-esteem. And as my inner self-esteem gets higher, it makes it easier for me to do right by myself, which means I'm benefiting every single life that I touch.
That's a powerful thing. When you feel like you're doing something that's going to impact other people, and into our earlier conversation about why you started the podcast, True Body Intelligence, please check it out. that is a big difference by knowing that it's going to impact other people. And what's so great and interesting that I'm discovering about a podcast is you never know who it's going to impact. You never know
Yep.
who's going to listen. Just like the guy that your friend that sent you that video of the 5 stretches. I don't think that guy ever thought he was going to change your life, and then you would change billions of other people's lives. But those
Yeah.
kinds of things can happen.
Yeah.
That's really remarkable. The other thing that struck me about your podcast is you talked a lot about giving up caffeine, nicotine, alcohol, and I know, from having a friend in the Marines, that alcohol is a big part of the Marine culture and probably the SEALs as well. So that that in itself is a big thing. But you gave up caffeine and nicotine and other altering. I think you call it daily approved
Daily
drugs.
acceptable drugs.
Daily acceptable drugs, right? And so list those off for us. And what are
Yeah.
those?
Yeah. The daily, so, well, let's talk about the motivation. The motivation for me is this. If my mind is without sobriety, how can I make clear decisions to benefit myself and the lives of those that are underneath my care? And so I made the decision to be in sobriety because I wanted to be more effective. And I wanted to make sure that the resources and the time and the efforts that people were investing in me, they were getting a result that was beyond their imagination.
Mm.
And so if I'm going to underpromise and overdeliver, it means my nervous system has to be in supreme alignment. My mind has to be super clear and quiet so that I can hear the directions from Creator. My body needs to be comfortable and strong so I can deliver the force necessary in order to help them break and interrupt the pattern of pain that they live in. My emotions need to be grounded so that regardless of how they're responding to me, my centeredness always keeps them in a state of security. And my energy needs to be absolutely abundant so that I can tackle whatever's in front of me with absolute confidence in a way that inspires and motivates people to take a risk, an emotional risk to benefit themselves. And the substances, the daily acceptable drugs, they interfere with all those things. And so some people might look at me like, oh, he's being extreme. And moderation is the key. I had that idea of moderation, and moderation, I was only so effective. And so there's a system out there called human design. In human design, I was called a manifester with sacral timing. And when you're a manifester, what you care about is impact the most. So do I care about articles written about me or awards or those things? No, because I'm being authentically myself. And one of my other highest values is impact. And if I consciously know that if I drink this or I eat that, that I'm going to underperform, and the people that are investing their time, energy, and resources are going to get less than what's possible to give them, I am never going to feel good about that.
Mm.
And so my desire to feel good and my desire to co-create with God requires me to contribute a certain amount of devotion and a certain amount of excellence to how I treat my body by what I put in it. And I know for sure by studying the effects of foods and substances and the damage that it does to the blood, forget about the organs, just the damage that it does to the blood, I could never afford to serve as powerfully as I want to if I am addicted to the daily acceptable drugs. And the question is, what drugs are those, right? And nicotine is the most obvious, right? Because No one likes walking past a smoker. Like, let's imagine you're going to a football game and there's a smoker right in front of you,
Man,
right?
I could smell a cigarette outside from 200 yards away.
Yeah. And I
People
will
think I'm
walk the other
exaggerating, but
direction.
I mean, literally, I can smell a cigarette from like 2 cars up on a highway. I'll smell it.
Yeah, for sure. Right. And so for people like me and people like you, and maybe the listeners in your podcast, I don't like the smell of I don't like the smell of it. I can feel in my nervous system the agitation that it creates, so I avoid it, right? And then there's white and brown sugar that's been refined. That's going to give me a headache immediately. And then the next day when I wake up, I'm going to feel like there's a tourniquet around my brain. I can't afford to feel like that because people are counting on me to serve them. Then let's go to alcohol. Alcohol is going to it's going to dehydrate my brain. It's going to take me at least 3 days to get my soul to decide to connect back into my body fully. Do I want to be disconnected from source, from God, from divine creation for 3 days, 72 hours? I only got maybe 100 plus years to live. I can't afford to have 3 days to be disconnected from source because I want to know God's love at the greatest measure. So if my motivation is to know God at the greatest measure, can I afford to have a headache? Can I afford to be inebriated? Can I afford to be under the weather? If he's using me as a tool to serve powerfully, do I want to be a knife that has a very dull tip? No, I want to be sharp. I want to be effective. And one of the other drugs is that's acceptable now is marijuana, right? And
Yeah.
well, look, and I understand the reason why people are using the daily acceptable drugs because they're using them as negative stress management tools because they don't have anything else, right? So if you're using those, understand, I have no judgment about you. Choose to do what works for you until you can find something else that works better. But the thing is, I have stuff that works way better, right? And you can do a 1-for-1, like trade out marijuana for meditation, right? Trade out cocaine and methamphetamines for exercise. Okay. Trade out alcohol for breath work, right? Trade out boxing or, bar fighting for sound healing. Like, we're fortunate. We're at this time in the world where you can hop on YouTube and you can find 100 people that are experts in something. Okay. And find somebody who resonates with you. Maybe you don't resonate with me, but I've said some things that make sense to you. Find somebody that does and get into some breath work, get into some exercise, get into some healing, get into some meditation, do some qigong, do some tai chi, like whatever you're attracted to that you know is healthy. Use that as a replacement for the daily acceptable drug that you're most addicted to.
Yeah, that's great advice. And I think to your point about moderation is, you know, even if you go a long period of time without alcohol or caffeine, and then you reintroduce it, the alcohol you're going to feel the next day, and you're going to notice it. It's going to be a palpable difference, right? And the caffeine, you're going to instantly feel some anxiousness. I forget what the anxiogenic, I believe.
Yeah. Those are all anxiogenic substances.
Right.
Anxiety causing agents, in case anyone wants to know what an anxiogenic
And then you're in this vicious cycle of, you drink, but then you get rebound anxiety. At the time, you're fine, but then you get either rebound anxiety and where you just feel off for 3 to 5 days, right? Especially if you've got a long period. I didn't know I was addicted to caffeine when I was in my 30s till I came down to visit my mom here in Cape May, which is where I'm recording this episode today with you. And we went out to breakfast and I hadn't had coffee because it was like we went to a late breakfast and I hadn't had coffee. It was like 10:30 and I'm like, oh man, I've got this throbbing headache. And my mother said, well, did you have coffee this morning? And I'm like, no, I guess I was going to get some here. She's like, it's probably the coffee. Well, sure enough, I got the coffee at breakfast. The headache went away. That was the day I said, you know what? I'm going to limit coffee to like when I absolutely kind of need it, or switch to tea. And I've been able to pretty much cut caffeine out, not completely, but almost entirely. So now I'm like do yerba mate here or there, some black Earl Grey tea here and there. But I didn't even realize I was addicted to it until I went that day without it for like 24 hours, I guess it was, right? So it's amazing how your body adapts and becomes addicted to something. And I wasn't even aware that I was addicted to it.
No, most humans are not. The challenge with coffee is this, is that the chemicals they use to process it, okay, are toxic. And if you're going to choose to stay on caffeine, find something like green tea or yerba mate, much better options. They're going to kill much less of your healthy bacteria. You know, when you look at the substances that people use for the daily acceptable drugs, what they're looking for is fake serotonin and fake dopamine.
Mm.
And everyone's brain is slightly different chemically. Some people need dopamine. They're dopamine people. They're quick responders. They have super fast minds. And some people are more serotonergic. And so if you're more serotonergic, what are you going to look for? You're going to look for sugar and you're going to look for alcohol. Okay. If you have that high dopamine producing brain, you're going to look for methamphetamines. You're going to look for cocaine. You're going to look for the uppers. And if you know this about your brain, then what you've got to figure out how to do is to wean yourself away. And I always say, look, the first week, use half as much. The next week, use half as much of that. The next week, use half as much of that until you're down to basically next to nothing. And then replace that ritual of, let's say, coffee with tea.
Mm.
Best idea would be herbal tea, but if that's too much of a stretch for you, get some green tea or get some green tea that's mixed with herbal tea, right? So you're getting less of an effect, because if you need caffeine to feel like you're alive, what you're avoiding is the feeling like you're dead. And if you avoid the feeling of death, you'll never make the choice to have life. And
That's
so,
powerful.
yeah. And so you've got to let yourself feel
In
it.
a pragmatic standpoint, caffeine is just stealing, like you had said, I was using 2000 energy in 1998, I was using 2000 energy.
Yep.
Coffee's that way, right? You use
Yep.
coffee or
Yep.
a lot of caffeine in any form, with those energy drinks, for example, right? You're basically stealing energy for the next day. You're
Yeah,
not,
you're stealing your future.
you're
Right.
not really getting energy back. You're taking it from somewhere, and your body's going to need to recover at some point from you stealing that energy. So while it might get you through the night or through the test or through the day or whatever, at some point it's going to extract a toll, like all of these things do. I want to talk. We're coming up on the hour here, and I want to talk about your podcast. And I'm 53. You said you were nearly 60, so we're fairly close in age. And I started this podcast about a year ago, so 52, and we're just launched November 11th because I wanted to have a whole bunch in the can and make everything refined, etc. And it's a big change, right? So what inspired you to start the podcast, and tell us a little bit about the format of it and what's going to happen with it down the road. I know you've got the 5 published already, but tell us.
Yeah.
About this.
Yeah, I have 22 in the bucket, and those 22 are all around stress, sleep, daily drugs, information that you can take action on that is free of charge, right? Because a lot of people are suffering from the economy that we're in, and they don't have extra money, right? So I like to give people things that aren't going to cost them any money. So if you want to save some money, the podcasts are for free. Uh, there's nothing on the podcast that I'm promoting. So, one of my friends asked me, he's like, well, is this clever marketing that you're doing? And I'm like, no, this is not clever marketing. This is like, I have a mission, a vision, and a purpose. And I want people to have this information so that they can take heartfelt action to their own benefit. And if more people take heartfelt action to their own benefit, I benefit. because the world becomes a more peaceful, focused place. So the format is simple. Uh, I have a co-host. He asks me some questions, and then I basically take off. And I yap and yap and yap and download and yap some more. And I give you all the information that you really need to understand what it takes to create a true transformation in your life. And what that is what I would call a successful pattern interrupt. Because once you interrupt the pattern that you've developed that's leading you towards a lack of health, right? That's making you unhealthy, that's creating communication problems between you and your spouse, that's creating power struggles between you and your children, that's creating confusion in the workspace, then the prudent action to take is to interrupt with that pattern. But in order to do that, my feeling is you've got to be honest with yourself first about where you're really at. Mm-hmm. And if you're on one daily acceptable drug, that lets us know that you're highly stressed. But if you're on two, okay, wow. Okay, if you're on three, you're on what's called a biochemical roller coaster now, right? Yeah. And you're up and down all day long. You're shifting from anxiety to frustration, back from frustration to confusion, from confusion to fear, back to anxiety. And the next thing you know, you're going to start having panic attacks. Okay. So what I want your listeners to know about the podcast is come in and listen in your car, listen when you're working out, and let the understanding and the information, but more importantly, let the place where I'm coming from, which is a position of service, to impact you, to figure out how you want to serve others.
Well, I'll tell you, and I've noticed on your podcast, having listened to the ones that have been dropped so far, your anchor person who's asking me the question, that your co-host there, oftentimes just say, I think we need to pause here, let people drink this information in, let them kind of make some decisions about what they're going to do with this information, and then we'll come back. So you're not trying to rush the information and just do a total data download dump, right? You're parsing it out in a way that people can absorb it and decide what they're going to do with that particular set of information. And I think you mentioned to me earlier that you're going to be also moving into a guest format moving forward in some of the...
Yes, I'll have some people on there's two things that I'm thinking about. One, it could be every other guest is somebody that I've worked on, right? So they can talk about their own experience of the work, which could be extremely powerful, right? Because are a lot of people going to resonate with my story? Maybe not. But if there's been 30 guests that have all have had different patterns interrupted, and they can hear and see what the impact was on their lives, then maybe because of the resonation with their story, they'll be able to take a risk.
Yeah. And when you've got 30 different stories, you're bound to hit a whole host of, thousands to maybe millions of people that will relate to one or more of those stories.
Yeah. And then, okay, I really like this guy. I really like what he's about. And then they can investigate him. And I will pick people that people know in public.
Yeah.
Right.
I also saw, there a couple of your beginnings, you've got like a blooper, where like one of them was good morning. And you're like, oh, God, how are they going to know it's good morning? You kind of laughed that off. What have been some of the more hilarious moments that maybe you've had while starting the podcast, getting it up and running?
I think what's funny to me about all of this is the amount of time, energy, and effort that you put into something, and how people have no understanding of what it actually takes to put a quality podcast together for their benefit. Yeah, that always strikes me as humorous.
I'll tell you, I'm guilty of that too, because I have been working with podcasters now for about 5 years, and started basically being a guest on podcasts. So like it took me about an hour to prepare, wasn't that big of a deal. But then when I started doing my own podcasts, I was like, wow, this is an insane amount of work, because by the time you get the data, the information, the outline, make sure you know who, like in this case, who's my guest. I had to, listen to at least 4 to 5 of their podcasts to make sure I have a deep understanding of what that is. So that's 3 or 4 hours of listening. Then I want to go to their website, make sure I know what they're doing, what they're up to, who they are. So you do all that work, and then you want to make sure that you cast your guest in the light that they are going to resonate with. Otherwise, it's not going to resonate with the audience. So yeah, I'm guilty of that same thing of thinking, oh, how much work can it be? It's a lot more work than I think people think, but
Yeah,
but
yeah.
it's
It's
also, I think,
hilarious. It's
yeah,
laughable how much work it is.
it is. But I think you and I both would agree in the long run, it's gonna be worth it.
Oh, it's worth every, like, it's really funny. I was sitting here with one of the Penn State wrestlers, and I'm the type of person that I never look at comments. I never look at likes. I'm focused on who's in front of me, and I have no awareness of who's following me. And one of the wrestlers comes in from Penn State, and he's like, "Man, that Instagram post that you put up about the scarf, I got my scarf around my neck already. I'm going to make sure this winter I don't get sick." And it's like, oh, I guess I should keep doing this.
Right.
Right. And it's that little bit of feedback that goes, okay, let me stay motivated. Let me stay committed to what we're doing here, because it's already impacting people's lives. And what could be more important than that? And so, as a listener, if you like our podcast, obviously, like, ship it around to some people. Yeah, I might say some things that they're uncomfortable with, and I don't know, my mom might want to listen. She's addicted to caffeine forever. But look, if you're coming from a place of love, if you're coming from a place of care, if you're coming from a place of consideration, the prudent action to take is to share information that could add good value to somebody that you love and care about.
And if you love that podcaster and they're helping you, the best thing you can do to help others and that podcaster keep their motivation going, give them a review,
Sure.
send them a DM, but most importantly, share the podcast and share the knowledge, and give some feedback, because we're talking into a microphone, right? We don't know who's listening and what their thoughts are, right? So
yeah, those are
the
the
only
things I
feedback
find laughable about it, right? Like, I'm
Yeah.
taking this thing, I'm throwing it into the multiverse, and I have no idea who it's going to impact, right?
Right.
And I can tell what's really funny for me is I was getting on a flight from Boston back to Los Angeles, and I came on the flight, and this woman, who was a flight attendant, two of them were like, "Oh my God, we're so happy to meet you." And I was like, "Who are these people? What are they talking about?" And she was like, "We love your podcast." And I was like, "What?" "Yeah, my son's been following you for a couple years, and da 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 da, and he's read your book, and like, you have no idea who you're impacting, right?" And
Yeah.
so, like you said, do all the good work that you can on the front end, so that you can create a quality show that has value for the people who tune in and resonate with you as a leader, as a teacher, as a guide, as a coach.
Absolutely. Well, folks, I want to thank Christopher so much for being on Behind the Mic Wellness today. It was a pleasure having you here. I learned a lot. You sound just like you do on your podcast. I felt like I had my own intimate moment here with you on this podcast. So thank you
Oh,
so
that's
much
wonderful. Oh, you're so welcome. Look, I'm happy to be here. We have a common brother that we share. So when he brought your name up, I was like, sure. There was never any hesitation.
Yeah,
Happy to be here. Happy
brother.
to serve.
God bless him. Same thing. You need me on your podcast or anything, you know where to reach me. So
Yeah,
it was
of
an absolute
course.
pleasure getting to know you. I hope we continue to stay in touch. So folks can find you at your website is
.com.
truebodyintelligence.com,
Yep.
and podcast
My
by the same
Yep.
name, Instagram by the same
No,
name.
no, my Instagram is Christopher Lee Maher, right? I wanted Instagram to be more personal. Like, think of True Body Intelligence as a servant of the public, right? In terms of information around stress and health and wellness and, emotional development and growth. And then Instagram is sort of like my moving along in my life, and I'm getting personal, right?
Right. A
And
little
it's
snapshot into your personal
yeah,
do's and
yeah,
don'ts and things.
yeah. Things that come into my mind, like, yeah, I think I should talk about this because this came up for me yesterday, right? And it's like in the moment where true body intelligence is like the entirety of my life, right? Instagram is what I'm actually experiencing in 2024 that I think would be of value to you in this moment.
Right. In this moment, I'm thinking about this in this timeline. And then
Yeah.
that's a great way. That's a great way to kind of break it down. Like and it's literally like, right. Instagram is a sort of a snapshot.
Yeah.
And true body intelligence is sort of, this is my body of knowledge.
Yeah. This
I
is my
wanna
body
have
of work. This is my devotion. This is my mission. This is my purpose. And, the Instagram is like, this is me today. This is how I
Well
feel
said.
today about this. A year from now, I might say a different thing, but this is how I feel about this now.
And I will
And hopefully you get good value.
and I will put your Instagram into the show notes as well
Oh,
as your
great.
website. And on the website you can buy the book, and it is books, I believe it's called Free for Life.
Yep, Free for Life, a U.S. Navy SEAL's unique path to inner freedom and outer peace. And it's a good read. Like, of course, in the front end, I'm like, if you don't like the book, burn it and blah, blah, blah. And I give you all that SEAL team bravado. But in the end, there's a lot of value there. And if you understand who I am through this podcast, I think you'll really enjoy the read.
Yeah. And for me, I'm an audio learner, and I believe you have an audio version.
Yeah. Yep. It's on audio. I'll send you hardcover, paperback, whatever format works for you. We have it.
Awesome. Well, Christopher Lee Maher, thank you so much for being on the podcast today. I can't thank you enough. I look forward
Thank you.
to in person.
Yeah, it was awesome.
By listening to this podcast, you agree not to use this podcast as medical advice, as I am not a healthcare provider. The information presented in this podcast is for educational purposes only. Statements and views expressed in this podcast are not medical advice. Guest statements and opinions in this podcast, including those made by Scott Emmens, the host, is not medical advice, and this podcast disclaims any responsibility for possible adverse effects from the use of information contained herein. Opinions of the guest and the host, Scott Emmens, are their own, and this podcast does not accept responsibility of statements made by guests. This podcast does not make any representations or warranties about the guest's qualifications or credibility. Individuals on this podcast may have a direct or non-direct interest in products or services referred to herein. If you think you have a medical problem, consult a licensed physician. Prior to beginning any new fitness program, breath work, or other healthcare practices, including supplements, you should undergo a full health screening with your licensed physician to confirm that any new supplement or health practice is suitable for you and to rule out any conditions or contraindications that may pose a risk to you. Confirm with your physician any new health practice or supplement, as it may not be appropriate for you and your health conditions. If you have any other kind of chronic health condition, whether known or unknown, or you're under the age of 18, you must consult a physician prior to undergoing any new supplement or health practice.